Yeah, so lots of things going on with spring practice right now, but we could talk about that, but everyone's kind of got their opinions. It kind of gets into the old scenarios of, oh, the defense won this day. Well, that means the offense sucks, and then vice versa. So don't necessarily want to get too much in the weeds of the practice report. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit more about our expectations for Brent Venables, specifically win wise, and then kind of compare that to how some first year coaches have performed in
Hmm.
recent years. So, I guess first off, to start off with a baseline for you guys, what is your expectation? Give me a win number total as far as saying, hey, this is a passing grade for Brent Venables in his first year.
I think
9.
for me, yeah. I was going to even go one above and say double digits. I think that when trying to consider what a passing grade is, like, what is a successful first season for Brent Venables here in Norman, I think you just kind of take a step back, just look across the rest of the Big 12. Iowa State's losing a ton of guys. They should take a step back. Oklahoma State, while they are going to have Spencer Sanders and Jalen Warren returning, they're replacing a ton of starters on defense, including the defensive coordinator. Baylor should once again be up there towards the top, and we all know the hype that's already being pumped up out of Austin with Texas and Quinn Ewers. So to me, a passing grade for Brent Venables is being one of the two teams in Arlington come December competing for a Big 12 championship. You've got a very talented roster that is just unproven in a lot of key areas right now. But at the end of the day, I expect Oklahoma to be in contention for the conference crown, and that's what's going to tip the scale for me in terms of pass fail.
I think if it came down to, let's say we don't get to Arlington, it would be how are you losing those games? I think the way you lose matters. And if he goes out and he loses 2 or 3 really nail biters, but handles the business on the rest, I think
Mm-hmm.
there's putting just a sheer number on it's really tough. If I were to do it, I'm saying it's 9, and that way anything in double digits I think is just a bonus on year
Yeah.
one. Especially looking, Adam, you put together this list here of first year head coaches and their records. Very few are hitting double digits, and so it's
Mhm.
very interesting to that you pulled that up. But yeah, I think anything above 9 would be just a sheer bonus. But I do think what happens and how the games are played in that stretch. I mean, guys, look at last year. We were what 8-0 heading into Waco, and we were all pissed.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't, even though you were undefeated, it didn't feel like it. And so obviously, I think we would love to be 8-9-0 heading into the end of the season with Venables at the helm in his first year. But I think how those games play, win or loss, from beginning to end of the season, it's going to say a lot just in more than just the win loss numbers.
I think the over under win totals for college football come out in June from Vegas, if I remember correctly from what we saw last year. So you would have to think OU is probably going to be sitting around that 9.5 number. I think that's going to be kind of the sweet spot that Vegas sets it in. But, Corbin, I think you make a good point too. Maybe wins and losses, yes, that's what we're going to judge this team by, but you kind of want to see how this team plays the game. We hear it time and time again from other podcasts, from the radio, even from the coaching press conferences. OU right now, 3 practices or 4 practices in. It's all about installing that culture that Brent Venables wants this program to have. So seeing the way that this team plays, especially on the defensive side of the football, I think we can probably, even though that there is some question marks with Dylan Gabriel, there's some question marks on the offensive line, and I would even say there's some question marks on the overall depth of the wide receiver room. I want to see how this defense plays. I think that from a talent standpoint, this defense that Brent Venables is inheriting is a lot better from a 4-star, 5-star player personnel type group compared to what Alex Grinch got whenever he came into Norman. So seeing what Venables, Ted Roof, and this defensive staff can do in year one, I think is going to kind of tell the tale for me. Maybe not so much as what wins and losses will do. Obviously, we expect them to compete for a Big 12 championship, but if you can kind of tell the difference in the way that this team plays compared to the previous regime, I think you've got to feel good about the way that this program is going, especially when you look and see how well Oklahoma is doing right now on the recruiting trail, building those relationships, especially with the 2024 and 2025 guys.
Yeah, I'm right in agreement with you guys there. Probably that, 9-10 win range, I think is passing grade for me. It's getting to Arlington. And then, of course, there may be some extenuating circumstances or just saying, hey, I like the way this team is playing despite winning
Mm-hmm.
9 games and just missing out on the chance to go to Arlington. Although I say that also knowing that my standard for this team each and every year, regardless of what's going on, is national championship
Yeah.
at the same time. So I know that doesn't really quite make a whole lot of sense, but it does in my mind. Corbin, you mentioned the kind of some examples. I did some research just to go back and look and say, hey, national championship level head coaches, because that's really what we want Brent Venables to be. Let's just take a look at those guys that maybe have contended or played in national championships, if not won them, and what they did in their first year in the job. So just kind of looking back real quickly, Kirby Smart at Georgia, 8-5 in his first year. Bob Stoops, we all know, 7-5. Nick Saban, 6-6 at Alabama. Urban Meyer went 9-3 at Florida, 12-0 at Ohio State. Chip Kelly went 10-3 at Oregon. Dabo Sweeney, 9-5 at Clemson. And then Gus Malzahn, who I think actually might be the most relatable situation, 12-2, played in a national championship, lost to Florida State in 2013. It's kind of a hard comparison here because it's not like OU was down. It's not like Lincoln Riley was fired, and it's not a complete passing of the torch like Bob to Lincoln or Urban Meyer to Ryan Day. It's a really unique scenario here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And going down that list, looking at Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, and other guys like Bob Stoops, I don't think that any one of those coaches going into their first year had a roster that was built quite like the one that Brent Venables inherited here in Norman. And guys, let's not forget, Adam, you touched on it. Lincoln Riley wasn't fired. OU is not in a rebuilding mode right now. They just kind of hit the reset button with the new head football coach right now. But this is still a team that won 11 games last season. So yes, they lost both of their starting quarterbacks that were in the room last year. A few key pieces, especially in the front seven. A lot of defensive production going to the NFL. So there's a lot of question marks around this team. But you can't deny the fact that this is a very, very talented roster. And if OU can figure out a way, and I put a lot of this on Jeff Levy, if they can be productive on offense, I think that this team can still win a ton of games, and Brent Venables can have a very successful year in year one here at Oklahoma.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. It is a strange situation, and yeah, I would lean towards being on your side, Tyler. There is a lot of talent on the roster, but anytime something is unproven, as a lot of this quote unquote talent is, it's hard to kind of put that label on it. Like, I mean, anybody can say you got a lot of talent on the roster, but it doesn't matter if they don't do anything. And so I think it'll be an interesting test this year. There's certainly question marks about this team moving forward. And unfortunately, I think there are more question marks now than what we were heading into last season. We certainly realized last season was a disappointment. Now, again, Adam, going back to what you said, so, excuse me, some circumstances that maybe a little bit outside of what we expected heading into last season, but they still underachieved leading up to that point as well, kind of when the wheels started to fall off. So it'll be very interesting just kind of see how it all plays out. I don't fully know what to expect and what I would be happy with. I think it's going to be more of what I see on the field versus just a sheer wins and loss record.
What would surprise you guys more, a 6-6 type of season, or OU playing in the national championship game?
More surprising?
Yeah.
I think it would be more surprising if OU went 6-6.
I would lean towards that as well, although I think both are very unlikely.
From a talent standpoint, it's the number one or number two best roster in the Big 12 by far. Texas and Oklahoma are in a category of its own. Baylor might be a close third, but just going down the rest of the list, I mean, it's OU and Texas. It's got to be.
Yeah.
And looking at the 2022 schedule, it's not that difficult of a stretch. I mean, yeah, you've got Texas and Dallas, but you've also got schools. You've got to go to TCU, but you get Baylor at home.
Look out for Nebraska. Look out for Nebraska. That's tough. That's a tough early season, new coach, hard place to play in, historic rivalry. I may be making that trip. It's not too far from me. That's
there as well.
That's one to just watch. If you get through Nebraska, then you kind of set yourself on a path of like, okay, like everything's in front of you. But if you lose, I think it's kind of like a reality check. Like, okay, this may take a little bit of time.
I hope you're not planning to drive from Colorado out to Lincoln.
It's a terrible drive, but it's not that bad as far as like hours wise. I think it's 4 or 5 hours.
Have you found a place yet for Lincoln, Adam?
I have.
I need to start looking.
Yeah, I got my Airbnb a long time ago before I even scheduled honeymoon stuff, before
I love it.
prices went up.
Priorities.
Yeah,
Love
I
it.
know. And I told my fiance that, and she
Set
was
her
like,
straight. Yeah,
I
Adam.
did.
Set the tone, Adam.
Well, I'm bringing her with me, so
Yeah,
she's there for the ride too.
yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I
Adam,
think that will be a tough game. Probably tougher than we expect.
I think that you put a pretty good question here, and curious to kind of get your thoughts on this as well. When talking about is this closer to a reset that Urban Meyer faced when he got to Florida, or is it kind of more of a passing the torch like Ryan Day experienced when Urban Meyer turned it over to him in Ohio State? And to me, this is close to what Urban Meyer had to do when he took over the reins in Gainesville. Urban had
Agreed.
a veteran quarterback in Chris Leak to go along with the talented supporting class, much like Brent does with Dylan Gabriel in this OU roster. Ryan Day, very, very similar to Lincoln Riley and Baker Mayfield. Ryan Day walked in and had Justin Fields, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and those boys. Ryan Day was basically handed a Lamborghini, and basically all he had to do was try not to drive the thing off the road. So
Yep.
I think that this is a little bit closer to what Urban Meyer had to deal with at Florida, and we'll see what Brent can do with this.
Yeah, I just thought of this as we're having this discussion. I wouldn't call it a rebuild. It's more of a restructure, which there is a structure and a foundation there. You're taking some of those pieces out and putting new ones in, but a lot of the framework is still there. So you're really just strengthening the core here and making everything stronger, adding a lot of new pieces. But it's not a total rebuild. It's not even really a reload necessarily. It's so unique. And that's why I went back and I said, hey, is there anybody in history that has had anything relatively similar to this type of situation? And really, there really wasn't, because almost no coach leaves a program like OU after all the success that he had. Lincoln's job was not in jeopardy. He just bolted in the middle of the night, and that really hasn't happened in recent memory. I think Gus Malzahn at Auburn was the closest. Now, he did come in, take over after a 3-9 season from Gene Chizik, but just a few years before that, Auburn had won the national championship. Gus Malzahn was familiar with the program. He was the offensive coordinator of that team. Came back to Auburn, which had lots of talent. Auburn's such a weird program. They're very much a roller coaster there. So it's still different at the same time, but I feel like that was the closest example that I could find. Everybody else was taken over after someone that maybe underperformed, like Ron Zook at Florida, or maybe was a passing of the torch like Mike Bellotti to Chip Kelly at Oregon. So it's just really tough to say, hey, here's the expectation, here's the gauge, even though all these changes that he's doing are so good and we're so excited about them at this point.
I think that's a really good conversation that we can save for another day in terms of Lincoln Riley's, job status here at Oklahoma after this past season, because I think that you could probably even make the claim, given the high expectations that there were going into 2021, the way that the season fell apart last year, if he did come back, we've seen the tweet, we've seen the statistics. OU has just gradually gotten a little worse over Lincoln Riley's 5 years here in Norman. So you don't make the Big 12 championship. I think that there could be some fans with some displeasures in what Lincoln Riley was doing at Oklahoma if he decided to come back.
The seat was definitely getting hotter, guys. But to transition back to Venables real quick, I'm going to be very interested of when the shine wears off and this program experiences a loss, maybe two, maybe three. We saw it back with and I'm not comparing the two. We saw it back with Mike Stoops, where all the catchphrases and all the lingo, and it just all got old, and people became robotic about it. I worry about that a little bit. And there's a lot of great things that you're hearing on Twitter videos, and the coaches are saying this, and it's all awesome right now. Is that going to be as awesome if we go up to Lincoln and lose to start, the season, 2 games in? What happens then? And so I'm going to be very interested to kind of see how this plays out once this team faces adversity, and they will. They are not going to go undefeated next season, I don't believe. That'd be awesome if they did. But what happens then? And that'll be really interesting to kind of see how Venables handles that.
Yeah, and it's kind of goes hand in hand with the last question I had on football topic here was, despite all the good changes that have come into play here, is it too much change to expect this team to really go that far.
Mhm.
And case in point, a good example of that is Billy Bowman today mentioning that, hey, we can finally return a punt, which drove OU fans crazy now.
Mhm.
But it's a little change. It's a good thing. It'll result in some good things. But compound that on top of the thousands of different things that are changing
Yeah.
for this program, this team, the coaching staff, so on and so forth. Is it too much to expect, 10, 12 wins potentially when there's
Mhm.
so many changes that there may just be some growing pains as we work through those?
I think that there's definitely going to be growing pains now. Whether that's an 8-win football team, a 10-win football team, that remains to be seen. But yeah, I think that there's one thing that we can be confident in as OU fans, and not we're not going to be sunshine puppers on this. There are question marks about this team going into next year. Spring game's not going to really tell you anything. We're going to hear a lot of things over summer workouts into fall camp, what we think is going to happen, how this team is performing, but we're really not going to know anything until, like you said, Corbin. I think Nebraska, that's your first real test where you're on the road, first time with the new coaching staff, first time that Dylan Gabriel is going to be. Probably that'll be the most hostile atmosphere he's played in, going to Lincoln. Regardless of how good they are, that place is going to be packed. They've got the sellout streak as well. But the culture change, the shoring up of the small things, the attention to detail, the in-game adjustments, the reprioritizing how important special teams is, and whether that's the kicking game, whether that's the return game, basically we're not going to be conceding, punting the ball, just fair catch it, move on to the next thing. But I think that there's going to be some holistic changes. We've already seen it with what Thad Turnipseed is trying to do with the fundraising. We've seen it from a culture standpoint, the toughness, the attention to detail, the attitude, the level of focus. And I'm very excited about this, but there's a lot of question marks still to be solved whenever it comes to this football team.